I knew something was wrong the moment I pulled into my parents' driveway and saw the silver balloons. Not the kind of silver that says, "Congratulations, scholar." The kind that says, "Sweet 16 and you're finally legal behind the wheel." I sat in my car for a moment with the engine still running, telling myself I was reading too much into it. Lily was in the passenger seat next to me, still wearing her good blazer from the ceremony that afternoon, her acceptance letter folded carefully in her lap like it was made of something fragile. She'd been holding it that way for the last 40 minutes, like she was afraid to put it down. "Grandma really went all out," she said, looking at the front yard. I didn't answer. I turned the engine off. My daughter had just been named a National Merit Finalist and offered a full academic scholarship to the University of Michigan, one of the most competitive programs in the state. She was 17 years old. Yeah. She'd spent the last 3 years waking up at 5 in the morning to study before school, turning down birthday parties and weekend trips because she had mock exams and essay deadlines. She had done this alone, mostly. Her father and I had been divorced since she was 11, and he had largely removed himself from the picture. It had been the two of us, in our small house, for a long time. When my mother called 2 weeks earlier and said she wanted to throw a dinner to celebrate, I had let myself feel something I hadn't felt in years when it came to her. Gratitude. Real gratitude, warm and uncomplicated. I had cried a little on the phone, which I would later feel embarrassed about. "Of course we're celebrating," my mother had said. "She's our granddaughter." I held on to that. I should not have held on to that. The front door opened before we reached the porch. My mother came out in a dress I had never seen before, the kind you wear to something important. She was smiling in that way she has, wide and performative, and she opened her arms not toward Lily but past her, toward the driveway. I turned around. My sister's car was pulling in behind us. "They're here," my mother called, to no one in particular, or possibly to the whole neighborhood. My sister got out first, then her husband. Then my niece climbed out of the back seat, and my niece was also dressed up, which struck me as odd. She was 15. She was wearing heels I had never seen on her before. She was grinning at my mother with the specific grin of someone who already knows what's inside the box. My mother walked right past Lily. She walked past my daughter, who was standing on the front path with her acceptance letter still in her hand, and she pulled my niece into a hug so tight and so long that I counted to 7 before she let go. I looked at Lily. Lily was looking at the ground. We went inside. The dining room had been decorated. There were flowers on the table, the good china, candles that my mother only brought out for Easter and Christmas. There was a banner above the doorway that I read 3 times before I let myself believe what it said. It did not say "Congratulations, Lily." It said "Our girl made the team," in pink glitter letters, and beneath it, in my mother's handwriting on a piece of cardstock taped to the wall, "So proud of our Emma first chair violin, Regional Youth Orchestra." I stood in the doorway. First chair. Regional Youth Orchestra. My niece had earned first chair in the Regional Youth Orchestra, which was a genuine accomplishment, and I do not want to take that away from her, but I need you to understand what was happening in that moment. My daughter was holding a full-ride scholarship letter to the University of Michigan. She had scored in the 99th percentile on her SAT. She had been recognized at a ceremony that afternoon in front of 400 people. And we were standing in a dining room decorated for my niece's violin placement. My father came out of the kitchen carrying a casserole dish. He looked at Lily and nodded the way you nod at a neighbor you don't know well. "Hey, kiddo," he said. Then he turned to my niece. "There she is, first chair. Do you know how proud we are of you?" Lily made a sound that was almost a laugh. It wasn't a laugh. I put my hand on her shoulder. I felt how stiff she was, how careful she was being. My sister caught my eye from across the room. She had the expression of someone watching a car accident in slow motion, present and uncomfortable and not moving to stop it. My brother-in-law was looking at his phone. We sat down to dinner. For the first 40 minutes, every single conversation was about my niece, the regional orchestra, the conductor who had praised her technique specifically, the performance schedule for the fall. My mother had printed out a little calendar of the upcoming concerts and placed one at each setting, and I sat there with Emma's concert schedule under my fork and tried to eat my mother's pot roast without letting my face say everything my face was saying. At one point, my father raised his glass. "A toast," he said, "to our granddaughter, who has worked so hard and made us all so proud." I waited. I genuinely waited. I thought the next sentence would be, and to Lily, who, it wasn't. He sat back down. He took a sip of his wine. My niece beamed. Lily was cutting her food into pieces she wasn't eating. I leaned over and said quietly, "Are you okay?" "I'm fine," she said, and her voice was so flat and so practiced that I knew she had been preparing it for years. That particular tone wasn't new. She had been refining it at this table since she was 9 years old. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not the banner, not the toast, it was that voice. That carefully flattened voice that my 17-year-old daughter had learned to use at her grandparents' house, because at her grandparents' house, her accomplishments were static, background noise, something to be patient through. After dinner, my mother brought out a cake. It was a beautiful cake, custom decorated, with a little fondant violin on top. I watched my daughter look at that cake. I watched her do the math, the planning that goes into a custom cake, the phone call to the bakery, the conversation about what to put on it, the pickup, the careful drive home with it on the back seat, and I watched her understand, fully and finally, that this dinner had never been for her at all. She had been invited as an audience member. My mother cut the cake and handed the first piece to my niece. I did not make a scene. I want to be clear about that. I did not raise my voice. I did not push my chair back and deliver a speech. I am not that person. I am the person who drives home very quietly and then sits in the kitchen after her daughter has gone to bed and thinks for a long time about what she is going to do. That is exactly what I did. Lily went to bed at 10. She hugged me at the top of the stairs and said thanks for the ride, as if the whole evening had been a minor inconvenience, a traffic delay. I stood at the bottom of the stairs after she went up, listening to her door close, and I made a decision. I had let this go on for too long. That is something I need to own, and I do own it. For years, I had made excuses. My parents had their favorites, but so do a lot of grandparents. And it wasn't malicious. It was just the way families work sometimes. And Lily was resilient and would be fine. I had told myself these things so many times they had worn grooves in me. What I had not let myself look at directly was the thing underneath. That my daughter knew. That she had always known. That the carefully flattened voice was not resilience, it was armor. And armor is something a child builds when they have been left unprotected. I texted my mother that night. I kept it short. I said that I had hoped the evening would include some acknowledgement of Lily's scholarship, and that watching her daughter be overlooked completely at what was supposed to be her celebration had been genuinely painful to witness. I said I needed some time before I was ready to have another conversation about it. My mother called me back 45 seconds later. I did not answer. She called 3 more times. Then my father called. Then my sister texted me asking if I was starting something, which was impressive phrasing given the circumstances. I put my phone face down and went to bed. The next morning, I woke up to a voicemail from my mother that lasted 4 minutes. I am going to summarize it, because I cannot bring myself to recite it word for word. The general shape of it was this. I was being dramatic. The dinner had been planned for Emma because Emma's news had come first. There would be plenty of time to celebrate Lily. Lily was going to be fine. She always is. And then, near the end, the part that I have not stopped thinking about since. The thing about Lily is, she doesn't need us the way Emma does. Emma is more sensitive. Lily has always been so independent. I played that part back twice. What she was describing as a quality independence, self-sufficiency, was the direct result of having been taught from a young age that she could not rely on them. They had not nurtured her independence. They had created the conditions that required it, and now they were citing it as the reason she deserved less. I called my mother back that afternoon. I told her I had listened to the voicemail. I told her that what she had described as Lily's independence was not something to be proud of. It was a wound they had inflicted and then complimented themselves for not having to treat. There was a long silence. Then my mother said I had always been too sensitive about this, and that Lily knew she was loved, and that I was making something out of nothing. I said, "Do you want to come to Lily's scholarship ceremony next month?" A pause. "When is it?" I told her the date. "Oh," she said. "I think that might be the weekend of Emma's first concert." I thanked her for being honest and said goodbye. I spent the next 3 weeks focusing on Lily. We went to look at her dorm options. We bought things for her room. I let her pick the music on every single drive. I watched her slowly stop bracing herself every time her phone lit up. Watched her realize that the thing she had been dreading, her grandparents' disappointment, Their disinterest was no longer a live threat because I had quietly stopped presenting her to it. She noticed. Kids always notice. "You haven't talked about Grandma and Grandpa in a while," she said one night over dinner. "No," I said. "Is everything okay?" I looked at my daughter. 17. Full scholarship. Years of 5 a.m. Mornings. That flat, careful voice. "Everything is fine," I said. "How's the packet from U of M?" She smiled, and it was a real one, and I filed that away. Then, 4 weeks after the dinner, I got a phone call from the scholarship office at the University of Michigan. The woman on the phone was professional and measured. She told me that the university had received a letter regarding my daughter's scholarship application. She said the letter had raised concerns about whether Lily's academic record had been, she paused here, chose her word, carefully accurately represented in the application materials. She said they were required to flag all correspondence and that this was a routine notification, should be aware the letter existed. I asked who had sent it. She said she wasn't able to share that information over the phone, but that I could submit a formal request to review any third-party correspondence affecting my daughter's file. I submitted the request that afternoon. The letter arrived in my email inbox 6 days later. It was 2 pages long. It was written on personal stationery with my parents' home address in the header. It was signed by both of them. I sat at my kitchen table and I read it twice. The letter suggested that Lily's academic performance had been assisted to a degree that may not be fully transparent, that she had received significant outside academic support that may not reflect independent achievement, and that given this, the scholarship committee might want to revisit the criteria by which finalists are selected. There were no specific allegations. There was no evidence. There was just the language of doubt, carefully arranged, from 2 people whose address was on the letterhead. I want to tell you that I cried. I didn't cry. I felt something colder than crying. My daughter had not had significant outside academic support. She had had me, helping with essays when she asked, and 1 semester of tutoring in AP Chemistry junior year. That was it. Everything else she had built herself, in the early mornings, in the library after school, in the particular silence of a house where it was just the 2 of us. I called the scholarship office back. I spoke to the director. I was clear and I was factual. I provided 3 years of grade records. I provided the proctor's documentation from her SAT. I provided letters from 2 of her teachers and the district academic officer confirming the integrity of her work. The director was thorough and kind. She told me the letter would be noted and set aside, that Lily's scholarship was not in jeopardy, and that I should know the university takes third-party interference in student files very seriously. I thanked her. I hung up. I sat for a moment. Then I picked up my phone and called my father. He answered on the second ring. I said, "I received a copy of the letter you and Mom sent to the University of Michigan." Silence. "I want you to know," I said, "that the scholarship office has cleared Lily's file completely, and that her scholarship stands. I also want you to know that I've spoken to an attorney, and that what you did may constitute tortious interference and defamation of a minor, and that I am deciding right now whether to pursue that." "Now wait a minute," my father started. "I am not finished," I said. "I also want to let you know that I'll be making some changes. You and Mom are listed as secondary contacts on Lily's university account. I am removing you today. You will not receive updates about her academic progress, her housing, or her financial aid. You will not be invited to orientation. You will not be on the list for her graduation. You can't just—" "I can," I said, "and I am." Then I said the thing that I had been thinking about since the night I sat in my kitchen and decided to stop being patient. "I also need to tell you something about the house. My parents had always maintained that when the time came, the family home, my grandmother's house, which they had inherited and lived in for 30 years, would be divided equally between me and my sister. It had been discussed. There were no formal documents beyond an old handwritten note that was not legally binding, but it had been the understanding, and I had never pushed for anything more formal because I had trusted them. Last year, when my parents had asked me to be added to the deed as a backup in case of emergencies, I had quietly consulted with a real estate attorney, not because I was suspicious, but because I believe in doing things correctly. The attorney had advised me on what the paperwork actually meant, and what options existed. At the time, I had filed that information away and not thought about it again. I thought about it now. "I'm going to need to revisit the deed conversation," I said. I'll be having my attorney reach out to you this week. What does that mean? My father said, and I could hear something new in his voice that I recognized immediately because I had heard its absence my entire life when he spoke to me. He was taking me seriously. It means what it means, I said. I'll let the attorneys talk. My father started to say something else. I said goodbye and ended the call. I am not going to walk you through every conversation that came after that, because there were many of them, and most of them were repetitive. My mother called. My sister called. My mother called again. There was a period of about a week where my phone felt like a thing I was at war with. The general shape of all of those conversations was, I was overreacting. I was being vindictive. Did I have any idea what I was putting the family through? The letter hadn't meant anything serious. It was just a concern. Parents worry. Surely I understood. And my personal favorite, from my sister, delivered with what seemed like genuine conviction, Lily wouldn't even want this. I let that one sit for a second before I answered. Did you ask her? I said. A pause. No, my sister said. Then I'd be careful about that sentence, I said. What I did not tell anyone, because it wasn't anyone's business yet, was that Lily and I had already talked. Not about the legal specifics, because she didn't need to carry that, but about the larger thing. I had sat down with her one evening and told her clearly that her grandparents had done something that wasn't acceptable, and that I had handled it, and that she did not have to manage her relationship with them or protect their feelings or flatten her voice ever again. I told her that she had earned everything she had, with no asterisk, and that anyone who suggested otherwise was wrong, and I would stand in front of that wrongness for as long as I needed to. She looked at me for a long time after I said that. Then she said, I kind of already knew something happened. I know, I said. Is everything going to be okay? It is already okay, I said. The scholarship is fine. Your file is clean. You are going to Michigan in August. She nodded slowly. Then she said, Mom, thank you for not waiting longer. I don't know how long I'll be thinking about that sentence. A while, I suspect. The attorneys did talk, as I said they would. The situation with the deed was complicated in the way that things involving property and families are always complicated, but the short version is this. The original intent had never been formalized, and my parents, when faced with the reality of what they had put in writing and what they had not, had less leverage than they believed. We reached an agreement that was, I think, fair by the metric of what had actually been documented and what could actually be demonstrated. I did not take anything that was not mine to take, but I did not walk away from anything that was mine to keep either. My parents did not come to orientation. They did not come to the send-off dinner I hosted for Lily at the end of the summer. When move-in day arrived in August, it was just the two of us loading her things into the elevator, which was exactly right. I stood in the doorway of her dorm room when we were done. She had put her acceptance letter on the little bulletin board above her desk. The first thing she hung up, she had printed it out fresh, the original having become too creased from all the times she'd folded and unfolded it. Last chance to change your mind? I said. She looked around at her room, at the bulletin board, at the letter. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, she said. I drove home alone. The car was quiet without her, but it was a different kind of quiet than the years before, not the quiet of two people being careful, but the quiet of something finished. I thought about my mother's voicemail. I thought about the word independent, how she had meant it as an explanation, a justification for the space they had always kept between themselves and my daughter. I thought about how wrong she had been about what that word meant. Lily calls me every Sunday. She has joined 2 study groups and a campus organization she is very enthusiastic about and slightly secretive about, which I find endearing. Her first semester grades came back in December, and when I saw them, I sat down on my kitchen floor for a moment, not because I was surprised, but because I was so thoroughly unsurprised that it physically moved me. She had done it again. She kept doing it. My parents have sent a few messages since August, tentative things. My mother texted me a photo of an article about the University of Michigan's engineering program once, with no comment, which I thought was her version of a peace offering. I read it. I did not respond. Maybe someday that will change. I genuinely don't know. What I do know is that the conditions of any future relationship will be determined by what is right for Lily, not by what is comfortable for them, and that line is one I drew clearly and have not moved. My sister and I have had several long conversations. They have been hard. She is trying, I think. She feels guilty in the way that people feel guilty when they realize they were a witness who looked away too long. I understand that. I don't need an apology from her as much as I need her to look directly at things going forward. We're working on it. A few weeks ago, I was cleaning out a drawer and I found the little concert calendar my mother had placed at each table setting at the dinner. Emma's performance schedule, printed out and laminated, with the spring showcase highlighted in yellow. I stood there holding it for a moment. I thought about Lily in her blazer, holding her letter, looking at the ground. I put the calendar in the recycling bin. My daughter is doing extraordinarily well, and she will continue to do extraordinarily well, and they will never be able to say they had anything to do with it. That is the truth they will have to live with. It is not the revenge I planned. It is simply the outcome of choices that were made by them, for years, and eventually by me. I just made mine a little later than I should have, but I did make them. And I will not be making the mistake of waiting again.